If you're too slow to go to the enterprise, then I think you can just lose the market to someone else who just spins up an enterprise sales team and just goes really fast. There are a lot of companies out there that are not good at inventing things, but they're really good at copying a good idea. So the kind of way to guard against that is to say, we're going to do sales earlier than it even makes sense.
Today's episode is about how to make a PLG motion work at the start and how to eventually balance the friction between building for individuals versus for companies once you start selling enterprise contracts too. Our guest today is Feross Aboukhadijeh, the co-founder and CEO of Socket, a developer-first security platform that protects your code from both vulnerable and malicious dependencies. And to date, Socket has raised over 60 million from the likes of A16Z, Abstract, Unusual, as well as angels such as Dylan Field, Aaron Levie, Nat Friedman, Michael Ovitz. With that, welcome for us. It's wonderful to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Pascal.
Of course. So today's topic is a great one, which is going from PLG to an enterprise motion and how not to lose touch with the PLG side of your business as you do that. But maybe to start, let's just start with your initial PLG motion. Why did you even start with a PLG motion?
Yeah, so a lot of that came down to just my background as a developer, as an open source maintainer before starting Socket. I was very used to building products that developers would use directly, open source libraries that developers are choosing to bring into their projects. And I personally was just very used to communicating directly to my users, and enterprise was completely unknown to me. I didn't know how enterprise sales worked at all. So part of the answer is just it was what was easy, what was much more familiar to me. But I can also talk to kind of as we got further along, like some of the thinking that went into the PLG piece. And so when we initially started building Socket, and for context, it's a developer security tool that helps developers use open source software safely. And so one of the things that developers spend a lot of time doing when they're writing software is choosing open source packages. What library am I going to use to build my application? What frameworks am I going to bring in? And so we were trying to follow the typical startup advice, which I think is really good, which is, ship something quickly. You should be embarrassed about the first product that you ship. Just put it out there in front of users. And so that's what we tried to do. We were trying to build a package search tool that would help developers basically search for their open source packages. And the goal was let's get this to be part of the developer workflow. Like if developers are coming to us as their starting point and they're searching for packages on our tool, we can build enterprise features on top of that. We can build a security product around that, and we'll figure that out as we go. But we wanted to, if we could capture this sort of developer attention, then it, by becoming this starting point that they don't even go to Google or go to NPM or go to PyPI. They go straight to Socket because Socket covers all the different packages and across all the different languages, and also provides you more useful information and is just easier to use. Then if we could own that, then that would just be this really strategic thing we could build a lot of things off of. And so it's almost like rather than starting with the problem you're going to solve, it's going to make you money, you're sort of solving a problem that you think you can solve, that is a real problem, and kind of almost solving the distribution problem before you solve the enterprise problem that you're going to make money from. And that was kind of how we thought about it. Let's just put something out there. Let's get developers using it. And so that's kind of where we started. It also was easier. It's not a lot easier. It's just frankly a lot easier to ship something that does can fit into one part of a developer workflow than it is to go and build a complete solution that you're going to sell to a large company that has a lot of security requirements. And especially the space we're in, to be totally honest with you, it's like a pretty mature area. We have some competitors that are 20 years old at this point, and so there's really a lot of features we would have had to have if we tried to tackle that head on. And so that's kind of why we started there.
You said you started very narrow, but it's right before you shipped, you actually realized that maybe you've gone a little bit too narrow and too small. So help me understand, right, kind of what that initial product actually looked like and what some of the thinking was that went into, hey, how do we actually build a product that doesn't just get used by people, but that actually kickstarts our PLG motion and around which we can actually build a business around.
Right before launch, we realized, oh my goodness, if we launch this, we're gonna have no way to capture who our users are. And we were gonna we're putting quite a lot of effort into kind of announcing, our launch. We had put in many, many months of development into the product at this point. Um, and so while we were trying to do this thing where you launch early, we wanted to balance that with like, okay, we're still going to treat it as a big launch. We're still announcing this thing. We're going to be driving a lot of traffic to this site. Like, what are we going to get from that other than some, hopefully some users that continue using the tool over time? And so a couple of things crossed our mind. Should we capture email addresses? Is there some way we can have people log in to get something, more than the free tool? And the simplest thing we could think of in the amount of time we had, which was literally a couple of days, was to build a GitHub app. And a GitHub app is something that integrates into the developer workflow on GitHub. And we basically selected a subset of the information that we have available and put it directly into the developer workflow so it could solve, one security problem for the user. And so that was this thing called typo squatting. The details aren't really that important, but it's a type of attack that can happen against an open source project and therefore can affect developers who are building applications. And so we built a way to, with a couple clicks, you install us directly into your GitHub environment. And then we ensure that if any of your dependencies is a typo of a more popular one. So if you're about to make a mistake as a developer, then we could jump in and save you and basically say, hey, wait a minute. Did you really mean to install this package that only has 10 downloads a month when one letter off, there's a package that actually has 10 million downloads a month? It looks like you might have made a mistake here. So it's a really simple way to solve this problem that was on people's minds. There was a lot of news stories about it. It was one of the things that our product could protect you from. And it was super minimal, frankly. But what was great about it was easy to do something. It was easy to take an action. And once you took that action, it was a meaningful action. It was, you're giving us, you're connecting us to your source code, which for a lot of companies, that's their IP, that's the thing they value. And so it sort of was this meaningful signal to us, especially in the early days of building a company. Like, do people care about this problem enough to install an app into GitHub? And if they don't, then that would actually be a great thing to know. But in our case, it actually was something people felt like it was a big enough deal and they could take action on. And so we actually had a ton of adoption actually on launch.
That's always the dream or the goal of anyone that starts with a small initial product for individuals. Is like, how do you seamlessly insert yourself into a workflow in a way that solves a real problem, in a way that earns meaningful trust, where you then earn the right to expand from there. Too few companies actually ever get there, but if you do, it's amazing. Now, from what you told me, the initial launch went well. From there, it started to grow quite quickly. Any insights for anyone listening that is thinking about the PLG motion? They did an initial launch that gets to some adoption. Any insights for anyone listening around how to now leverage this initial adoption and kind of momentum and actually grow the PLG side of the business quite quickly?
Yeah, I think the most important thing we did was actually in crafting what is going to go into the free part of the product. The part that the end user can adopt. It needs to be something that's meaningfully better than what exists, because you're going to be missing a lot of features if you launch early, like like I encourage you to do, like I encourage everybody to do. And so the thing you build needs to be more useful than nothing. So it is useful, right? And likely that's going to be something that is very different than what exists on the market already. Because if you try to be too similar and try to check too many of the boxes of the products that already exist on the market, then you end up pattern matching into that, and then you're going to just look worse because you're just going to have a lot less of all the long tail of features and things that the other products already have. So it's better to just pick the thing that makes you different, the thing that the reason why you exist, and to make that the focal point. And then even if the other parts around it, don't exist yet or are in development, then those can kind of, like you said, those can kind of be the thing that you fill in over time and become, your it's like you've earned the right to kind of now solve more problems for the customer. So I think it's just really important to pick the right value prop in the free product. Don't try to look like an enterprise product and do all these things. Don't go do SSO, don't do, audit logs, don't do, these enterprise-y data retention things, even if you're going to need them later. That's not like where you want to start. And maybe that's kind of obvious advice, but I think I've seen too many people try to kind of just go in a room and build everything and then launch it. And then it's sort of unfocused. I almost think it's better to actually make the product intentionally be missing large pieces of functionality. So it's really, really clear the thing you're testing and the reason, the kind of why now, or why would I do anything here when I already have a tool that, for instance, in our case, right, there are plenty of tools that can tell you if open source libraries have vulnerabilities in them. And when we launched, we didn't do that at all. Now, this is something we do now, and it comes up in every single enterprise deal that we do. It's a really important piece of telling you whether an open source library is safe. But it's sort of the norm in the industry was to focus on vulnerabilities, and we're telling this story about no, that's fine, but there's this whole other area that every other tool is neglected that's really important for security. And so we just started by not even attempting to do what the previous tool did, and that meant that really it would be very hard to earn enterprise deals, but it was sort of it gave people a reason to take an action. It's like, oh, this fills a gap, and there's no duplicate functionality either. That's the other thing, is people don't like to, if you look too much like another tool and they already have another tool, then now they're sort of installing a duplicate tool. And that also, and again, you haven't earned the right to replace, all the functionality in their current tool yet, because you're such a new entrant into the space. So, I think that's the most important part, is just picking the right piece of functionality, kind of make the focal point of what you launch. And then, there's a lot more that comes after that though, too.
A great way to summarize it is, it's very hard to earn the trust of someone, but once you've earned the trust of someone, you can expand on it. And to get in the door, to earn that trust, you have to be very different. But once you've earned the trust, it's okay to start to replicate what some of the others are doing. Now, right, in PLG, there's always a friction between growth and growing the user base and putting things behind a paywall. How do you think about that part of building a PLG business?
So I think the most important thing is to get people using your product. It's way more important than revenue, especially when you're just starting out. Like, if you can become a core part of the developer workflow, something that people rely on, and you think you want to think a little bit about, like, oh, ultimately, how could I make money from this? That's also an important piece I don't want to underemphasize, but it's more important that you just be useful and be in the workflow. So, just to say a little bit on that point, I did open source software full time for many, many years before starting Socket. And, it is definitely possible to build something that is used by a lot of people, but doesn't have a business model behind it. So don't completely ignore that part. I made many open source libraries that, will never have a business behind them. But then there's many other companies that do start off as an open source project, and then they turn that into a business. So, it is important to have an idea of where you want to go with the business and how you're going to get big enterprise deals later on. And that's like a plausible plan that, makes sense. But it's more important, in my opinion, to actually just get into the workflow, become dependent upon. And so, that's where we put all of our time and attention. And so when it comes to paywalling things, we basically didn't paywall anything for a long time. And that was just because, again, we just wanted people to use the product. And when we ultimately did launch a pricing page, I was okay with us not actually implementing a lot of the paywalls on the pricing page. And this is, by the way, a dirty little secret of a lot of startups is, and I see this in even tools we use, is that the pricing page often, especially if the earlier the company you go to, like, half of those things could be unimplemented. So, like, oh, you're only supposed to use it with, 5 team members, but you can add more than that, and it just lets you, and then later on they when you have time, you clean this up. But you can, literally have companies that are in the, doing millions of ARR that still haven't implemented paywalls. And I'll admit here, maybe I shouldn't, that, we have some of those in our product too, where it's like the work required to implement it is a lot, and we'll just get to.
I'm laughing because I'm the user of some of those, and I should be paying, but I haven't been prompted to pay yet. And so thank you for all the free usage, basically.
and that's that's something that you will want to clean up later. It is, you are leaving money on the table, but it's better to be, especially when you start, I think, giving away more value. You don't have to capture you certainly, you never want to capture all the value that you're creating. Otherwise, there's no point to you want the customer to be getting value beyond what they're paying you. You're always only capturing a percentage of the value that you create. And in the beginning, I think it's okay if that's a small percentage. If that's as long as you're earning that trust, you're getting built into the workflows, you're earning the right to later on, implement those paywalls, and then eventually you do it when you need to. So, and that's the part that I think kind of gets to where I don't think we've done necessarily the best job as a company, which is you have to really think about the path from the free to the paid plan to ultimately the enterprise plan. And that's something that's always a work in progress, and always something that you're improving upon over time. And the paywalls then do become really important because you have to have a reason why every plan exists. Like, why would somebody go from this plan to this plan? Like, what is the forcing function? It can't just be a grab bag of random features. You have to have a persona in mind for that plan. And you'll see this sometimes in the names of plans. Like, people will have a team plan or a business plan, and it's like, oh, this is only appropriate for an individual team. But once you're using it with multiple teams, and then you go to the business plan, or you'll have like a plan called hobbyist or whatever. So there's these different ways people try to signal this, but the features that you actually put in each plan have to also make sense, and there needs to be. And ultimately, what I think happens is there's usually one or two or maybe three at most things that actually drive people to the next plan. Like, what I'm saying is, like, there's like maybe one or two or three limits that actually matter. And so when you start off thinking about the plans, you might have like kind of all this differentiation, but then ultimately learn that it's really only a couple of things that people hit limits in the product, and then are kind of forced to upgrade, and that's really what drives a lot of the growth. And that's kind of what we're in the process now as a company of actually like iterating on and figuring out.
Can you, or to make it tangible for those listening, give some examples of what do you thought maybe would be the difference between a hobbyist and a team plan and a business plan, and what now actually like is actually true and what they truly care about and what the metric is?
Yeah, we thought originally that we wanted our free plan to be only for like open source projects, or in other words, public repositories on GitHub. And our thinking was, well, hey, if you have a private code base, you're probably a company. And this is actually a business model that GitHub adopted initially. I think they've since changed it, but for many, many years, they were like, oh, we're free for open source, which is why the whole open source community uses GitHub. But then if you were going to make a private repo, you're now not contributing to the world, you're not helping others, and so that's what you pay for, right? That was kind of the thinking. So we kind of felt like, oh yeah, let's start there. That makes sense. And then what we've learned is, well, first of all, that's not a correct assumption anymore. Like, there are, for instance, a lot of cryptocurrency companies have open source projects. There's even SaaS businesses that are open source, where they have a whole business, maybe multi-million-dollar ARR business built on top of an open source project, and we really should be charging those users. But with our pricing model, it was those people would be able to use the free plan, forever. And so that was like a mistake and particularly for us too. We started off with a lot of cryptocurrency and like blockchain Web3 customers, because our product is really good at stopping the sorts of attacks, supply chain attacks that were affecting, in particular, crypto projects, and where the implications of those attacks are really irreversible in the case of crypto. And so, for us, that decision, to make the private be the reason you pay was particularly not a good fit for those initial customers that we had, because it was like, oh, well, we don't really have a reason to charge them. And so we ended up moving, and this is something we're kind of still in process of doing. But we're moving more toward like specific specific things that indicate maturity in your usage of the product. So like, oh, do you want to open up tickets in Jira whenever an issue is found? That's something that like a larger team will want to do. Like, it's part of a workflow. Do you want to get webhooks whenever an alert is detected, so you can react to those and kick off an automation or kick off some type of process? Things like that we know only, like, I can tell you, anyone who wants to use those features probably should be paying us, right? So we ended up learning it was more things like that than the public-privateness of the repository that mattered.
Appreciate you explaining that. Makes a lot of sense. Now, right, to take a step back to when you started to charge, and then to also bring enterprise into the mix. At what point did you turn on monetization? And was that first, right, charging individuals or trying to put things behind a paywall? Or did you actually jump kind of straight to looking into more larger company adoption? And why did you end up choosing that sequence?
Yeah, we actually went straight to enterprise sales, and that was because of a few reasons. I think the big one is that if you're too slow to go to the enterprise, then I think you can just lose the market to someone else who just spins up an enterprise sales team and just goes really fast and just kind of gets awareness with all the customers. So we invented this kind of new category of supply chain security tool. We had a new approach. We showed it was a good idea. We showed there was interest in it. And then there are a lot of companies out there that are not good at inventing things. They're not good at actually coming up with ideas, but they're really good at copying a good idea that they saw somewhere else and then just bolting on a go-to-market function. And that's like what like a lot of companies do. There's a lot of examples of companies where the product is worse that wins, but they just did better job marketing and doing sales and they just take the market. And that happens a lot. And it's really sad to me as an engineer and as a craftsman who cares about, good products winning. And so I didn't want us to be one of those companies. And so the kind of way to guard against that is to say, we're going to do sales earlier than even makes sense. Let's just start sales like right away. Let's not like do this later. Let's not like wait too long to do it. Let's just start and learn, because we also needed to learn. Like I didn't know how to do enterprise sales. So there was also kind of like an understanding that this is going to take some time. So let's start to figure it out.
Now, what a lot of companies do, and I guess it partially also depends on the definition of enterprise, but right, a lot of startups start selling to other startups, and then eventually it's kind of the larger startups or mature startups, and then eventually they start to transition into true enterprises. It sounds like you kind of straight went after the almost like all size companies, or how did you approach that part?
That's a good point to clarify. So yeah, initially our enterprise plan was sold to like other startups, right? But the motion was really different. Like, you'd be getting on calls with people. You'd be like talking about how they're going to evaluate the tool. You're sending an invoice like in a PDF to them that they have to look at. You're docu-signing, the contract. Like all this stuff was, just foreign to me and the team before doing it. And so there was a lot of like things to figure out there. And then obviously like every single deal, we were just increasing the price until we just got pushback basically, because we didn't know, as we built up confidence, like part of this was also price discovery. Like how much can we charge for this? So we would, I think our first deal was like $1,000, and then actually it was $500. So that was our first enterprise deal, was $500. And a lot of these early deals are design partnerships where you're admitting to them up front, like, hey, this product is incomplete. You know it, we know it. We're not pretending otherwise. We're leveling with you. But the reason why you're doing this is because we're going to listen to you. Like we're going to kind of tailor this to you, and you have to be careful. You don't want to tailor it too much, because then you just become a consultant and you're just building one-off software. But if they're a smart design partner, if they're the kind of person you think there are more of in the market, then listening to them and just having a close relationship where they tell you things, you go and build things, and then you show them those things the next week, and you do that in a loop, can be really valuable. And you should get them to pay for that something, just because then it also shows their seriousness. And it also gets you to practice, as you bring on more of these, you just keep upping the price. I think our first one was 500, and the next one was 1,000, and the next one was like 5,000. And we just kept driving it up with each one of these design partnerships and that built up our confidence as well, which is also really important. When you're a founder who's only ever built consumer products or used consumer products, and you're used to the things costing $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month, just being able to ask somebody for $10,000 with a straight face is also like a thing you have to learn. So, that was it's a part of the experience.
That's very fair. Now, but there's obviously a lot that goes into how to close enterprise deals and everything, but I don't necessarily want to touch upon the sales side. What I find much more interesting is right now, it sounds like you started to get good traction with enterprises quite quickly. There is quite a bit of friction between building a product and a company for individuals versus building a product and company for enterprises. So maybe help us understand, kind of how did you go about that transition from like almost like building a different type of company, and then also what kind of friction did that cause with regard to the different stakeholders that you were serving as a business?
So in the early days, it was pretty straightforward because, like I said, we had that GitHub app. It was used by a lot of folks, and really what the enterprise customers that we got did for us was they gave us direction for like what was important to focus on next, and we put all those things into the free product. And so we really the kind of behind the scenes, there really wasn't too much of a difference between the free plan and the enterprise plan, other than the pricing page, frankly, and the support that the enterprise customers got and the direct relationship they had with us. So there wasn't really a conflict at that point in time. It was like it was very natural. But then what happens is over time, when you start to want to displace other tools and not just be an add-on, then you have to end up going down this laundry list, especially if you have like incumbents, right, that are established in the space. And like I said, we have some competitors that are 20 years that they've been around doing this type of stuff. So there's really a long list of different things. For us, it was things like license scanning, vulnerability management, prioritizing vulnerabilities, supporting different ecosystems besides JavaScript, which is the only thing we supported when we launched. So all these things like are years, of roadmap for a company to build out. And so, and some of those things only appeal. They're not going to help. Like if we do Java, right? That's not going to get us that many free or PLG users because Java is like, an enterprise language, right? Or .NET, right? Like, so that's when you start to get into this conflict between, okay, if we devote the next quarter to just implementing .NET as a language in Socket, like we're going to get no free users from that. Like almost every new user that's using that is going to be someone who we handheld through a sales process, who's a big company, right? And that's where the engineering resources, it becomes a direct trade-off between the PLG and the enterprise motion. And it's really hard to do both well. Like that's the advice we got before we tried doing this. And it's been what we've learned from going through it ourselves. Like you end up just making these very zero-sum decisions. Like, are we going to implement this feature that only helps our enterprise paying customers? Or are we going to go and implement this feature that would get us a ton more users or would make the free users happy? And you just have a limited amount of resources and you just have to make a decision. And in our case, we erred on the side of going for the enterprise deals because at that point, we felt like it was more important to prove we could start to get 6-figure deals, 7-figure deals for what we were building, and win the top of the market so that we didn't lose out to a competitor that moved faster in that sales piece, right? So we just bit the bullet and went for it. And there were quarters where we just did nothing but enterprise features in our engineering roadmap. And that, as someone who loves like really good consumer products and really good developer products, I definitely felt bad during those quarters because it felt like we weren't improving that experience. But now that that's been established, we've been able to move more of the engineering resources back to the free and PLG parts of the product. Maybe not as much as I'd like, but there is now more energy that can be put into those things and improving that those parts of the product for everybody.
A lot of PLG companies that eventually transition into enterprise eventually stop caring about the PLG motion as much because they developed a sales, right, outbound organization. They have a brand, they have a name, and all the money's in enterprise. So why keep developing a product for individuals? That was actually in the early days an incredible door opener in how they even got into enterprise. How did you think about, right, the friction between the PLG and like bottom up, going through individuals and then expanding, as you said, from individual free to paid to team to enterprise as your main, right, go-to-market and sales channel versus, right, building out kind of more of an outbound or an enterprise sales team that goes out and hunts these deals and everything else? And then the implications of that, obviously, on where your product priorities are.
That's a really good question. Yeah, it's an ongoing balance between a lot of different considerations. I think for us, the reason to continue investing in the PLG piece is that we can point to enterprise deals where we got meaningful revenue, where the PLG piece played a key role. So when you see that, it makes you not want to abandon it, right? It makes you realize the value of it. So one key way that plays out for us is we're a product that is purchased by the security team generally, although sometimes engineering purchases it as well. But generally, it's the security team that's bringing us in. And the tool is used by developers. It's part of the developer workflow, and developers play a key role. And they're really stakeholders in the decision-making process about whether to buy the product, though they're often not the ones paying for it, or it's not coming from engineering's budget. It's a security budget. So that means that engineering has a say in the product. And so to the extent that we have a good reputation among engineers, to the extent that engineers are aware of our product and have heard of us, have read our blog, have stumbled upon our public free package pages that give you information about the quality of an open source project, that has a direct impact into the ease of a sale, right? Because the engineers are going to, when they're brought into the discussion, they're going to see 3, 4, 5 different security tools that the team is evaluating, and they might only recognize one, and that's Socket. And then they'll say, oh yeah, I know Socket, right? And that helps. That really does help. And there's also cases where it's where the deal might be paid for by the security team, but it could be the developers that recommend, or are asked, hey, can you figure out a way to solve this problem, and then they'll pull us into the process and say, oh yeah, I've heard Socket can do this. And then it might be the security team that kind of ends up doing the evaluation and buying it. So there's ways like that we can really point to. And so, it's something that I think it would be a really big mistake to abandon. I've seen other companies in our space actually do it too. Like, there's been companies that started off really developer friendly with a really easy to use product, and then did exactly what you described, where they just went full enterprise only. And I think, I just think it's a mistake. Yeah, I think it's a mistake to abandon that when it's what got you that interest and attention, and what got you on people's radars to begin with.
To make the friction even more tangible, as you talked about the roadmap in different languages, but I think there's also fundamental differences with regard to how you should think about your product when it comes to enterprise versus for individuals. So, right, one of the things that you said is when you're building for enterprise, you're basically building a product that still requires a lot of handholding of the users, versus when you build it for individuals, you basically ideally build a product that teaches them how to use it at scale. If you can maybe explain that a little bit of it and some of the trade-offs and things like challenges that you face, and how you're also at least trying to resolve them as good as you can nowadays.
It's really hard to solve this problem. It's about the muscle that you develop in the company about how you solve problems. So when you have all users that are paying you $10 a month, or are free users, then when you face problems in the product, you're going to, first of all, you're going to be getting that feedback differently. But let's ignore that for a minute. When you get the feedback, you're going to solve it not by educating individual users by emailing them or something. You're going to go and solve it by updating your documentation, by updating the product itself, to onboard the user better, to make the buttons and the naming conventions clearer. You're going to solve it with product, right? You're going to solve their problems with product improvements. But when you have enterprise customers paying you 6-7 figures, you can solve these problems directly with that user. So you're going to be getting a support ticket from them, or you're going to get a Slack message, and you can just say, oh yeah, let me tell you how that works. And then you might even jump on a phone call with them for 20 minutes and show them it, because they're paying you enough, and you want them to be successful. And what's better than just literally, directly solving their problem by holding their hand through it. And so when you do that, you can sort of end up neglecting unintentionally the core problem that caused the confusion, and let that come up again and again and again with future customers, because each time you just solve it by, oh yeah, let me show you how that works, and it just becomes sort of the way you solve it is with people, with human, labor, basically. So that's why it's hard to do both well, is because you end up just developing a way that your company handles these things. And so, yeah, I mean, the way we try to balance it is we do have a lot of free users. We do hear from them. We do get support tickets. And then we also try to, we are, at our company, all of us are, potential users of the product. So we have opinions about how it should work. And we're trying to take a very careful design approach to the way we solve these things. So we know that we can't just do what some enterprise products do, which is just have a million checkboxes and a million buttons and settings for every possible way you could use the product. We're trying to think about, okay, I want this tool to still be usable by an individual, so what's a good default? What's a good way to expose incremental complexity in the product over time, so that you can opt yourself into more complexity as you need it, as you reach those limits in your company, and then need those things, that you can then reach for them and they're there, but they're not in your face if you're not using them. So how do you come up with good primitives that are powerful and scale, really well? It's a taste thing, I think, really, at the end of the day. Is yeah, ultimately what we really need to get to, where we want to get to, and what the gold standard is that you actually can show a picture of how you go from free to team, to enterprise eventually, right? How do you go between those plans? And you can sort of measure improvements you're making in the product and how that actually affects the transitions between the different plans. And so that's really where you want to get to, because the advantage you have if you can actually make that work, and it's not just where we're at now is we have a really good PLG, free thing that educates the market about our product, and we have a really good enterprise motion. But connecting them is what gets you to a place where then your cost of acquiring new customers gets really, really low, because then you just have a constant inbound stream of existing users that already know about your product, that now just need to maybe talk to a salesperson for 30 minutes to just learn about the pricing and different features that might be available in the enterprise plan, and then they make a decision, and they're already familiar with your product. And that's really, really good for look at businesses like Figma. They're a great example. Figma, amazing, right? They they have this figured out. So their cost to acquire enterprise users is super low because people just start using it and then they eventually hit some limit, or and then you have to talk to sales, and then you do enterprise, and and it's just really powerful. It lets you not have to throw a million salespeople at it, a million SDRs, a bunch of outbound stuff, ads, all this kind of stuff. You can just spend a lot less on.
What do you believe? Or because it sounds very obvious and simple, but like, what do you believe you guys haven't necessarily figured out yet? So you're not, because you have, right? One could argue you have the free user base. So why aren't you just putting limits and then eventually, right, they'll buy it? And I know it's a lot more complex than that, but what do you think you haven't necessarily figured out yet that, for example, Figma has figured out within the product that keeps you from being in that place?
Well, part of it is, again, it's just a resourcing thing. Like, we have so much opportunity at the enterprise side of the market at building these things for enterprise that we're just underinvesting in that part right now. But I think that will continue changing over time, and we will get there. Then part of it is too, is just you have to. I think we're going to probably need to have almost like a separate team within the company that just focuses on the free users and focuses on growth, which we don't have today. So I think that just focus on the free user and treating it almost as like its own product, and putting in the right measurements, making sure that the limits you're putting in are actually effective, and you get rid of the limits that are just creating complexity and don't actually drive upgrades and things like that. So it's really just a resourcing thing for us right now. We will do it.
That's yeah. No, I strongly believe that as well. Maybe right to take a step back from that whole process. What were some of the major learnings that you had throughout, or to ask it differently, if you were to do it all over again today, how would you do it differently than you guys did?
I mean, this is kind of comes to the last question. It comes back to the last question in that, if I could do it over again, I probably would have tried to grow the PLG into to build that funnel from day one, and not, because you can see how the enterprise focus takes your attention away from that and splits your focus, right? And so the more you can get figured out before you bring on enterprise sales, the better. So I think I probably would have spent more energy and effort on that, knowing that when we do start to bite off enterprise stuff and take that on, it's going to distract you for a really long time, and just try to have even more of that stuff figured out. That's one big one for sure.
The challenging part, having been involved in a couple of these businesses, the challenge that I see is, right, you start to charge individuals and they maybe pay $10 a month or whatever. In order for that business to actually work, especially in today's market where, right, revenue and adoption milestones are quite significant to raise the next round of funding, it's very hard to get to enough paid users to actually make the business side of it work. Well, to buy yourself enough time to actually figure out the rest, which is why I read a lot of folks actually do that jump straight from almost from free, and then they dabble a little bit at individual paid users, and then they all jump straight to enterprise.
Yeah. So maybe this is actually the best practice, to do what we did. Just start with free, get the attention, get the awareness, go prove enterprise and prove that you can actually make meaningful money, and there's actually a big market, and then kind of fill in the middle. So, maybe that is, for that reason.
You're very good at fundraising, right? It's one of the two, because you can fill that hole. I jumped in though. So any other learnings or kind of things that you would do differently from their process? Just this whole journey, right, from going from PLG to enterprise, balancing it and so on. It's basically, right, kind of taking a step back for anyone listening that is somewhere along this process. What are some of the major things you do potentially differently, or had to really learn the hard way because you made a bunch of mistakes at it?
I think the big one is just I do feel. Actually, I don't think I want to. I was going to say, you can always do. I think you can always do. You can always do more. You can always do better. There's always, as a founder, you're always looking around thinking how can I make this better? And so it's easy to be really critical and just say, I do. But the reality is, when you're so resource constrained and you have, your team is 4 people or 5 people or whatever, there's only so much you can do. And so I don't know if we could have actually done it any better than we did. I think we started with the sort of wedge to sort of break into the market with something different. We captured a bunch of installs and proof that people cared about the problem and were willing to trust us in a pretty deep way. And then we went and proved that people would pay a lot of money for it at the enterprise level. And so I think we kind of did what we needed to do. The challenge as a founder, as a first-time founder, is sometimes, you want to see a lot of proof that things are working before you go and hire a function out. You want to prove like, okay, can I sell this myself? Okay, now I've proven that. Now let me hire one salesperson. Can they sell the product? Then let me go, and now after I've proven that, let me go and hire another salesperson. And you kind of want to go in this incremental way, very carefully, proving things out each time, which is good, because it protects you from over hiring before you're ready, building out a big bloated team before you have product market fit. But the flip side of that is if it actually is working, then you might have been better off if you just hired all that stuff right away and just kind of built it out right away. Like, if I know what I know now, that if I knew it was going to work as it has, then I probably would have just started growing that part of the team out faster. I would have got my SOC 2 right away on day one, even before we had a single customer, because that thing takes like 3 to 6 months to go and get, so you can sell to enterprise. You could just parallelize a lot of this stuff and just start building it. But that's the danger then is, like I know some second time or third time founders where they come in and they know, oh yeah, I'm going to need this and that function, and they just sort of start like hiring out. Oh, I'm going to need a VP of sales. I'm going to need a VP of marketing. I'm going to need head of talent. I'm going to need this, and then they do that before they actually have any product market fit, and then suddenly now they have this like big monstrosity of a company that can't change directions, and and it can be kind of bad. And so it's like you want to kind of calibrate it perfectly. And so when it works, you're like, I should have gone faster. And then if it doesn't work and you went too fast, then you'll regret that too. So it's really just hard. It's a hard problem. I think looking back, I think we would have hired people faster probably.
It's interesting, right? Because we, the reason you just mentioned is like, we as a firm, our max check is $1 million, and which isn't very large even for a first round in today's market, but we actually have quite a few second, third time founders that come back to us and say, hey, my last company I raised 5 million out of the gate. I do want to have the constraints at least early on, but I'm going to raise $1 million until I have enough signal that I'm onto something, and then I'm going to go out and raise a much larger round and then go out guns blazing. But it's like ultimately ideally burn is highly correlated with your confidence level, at least early on, with regard to what you're on. It's almost like a risk lever, and the higher the burn, the higher the urgency should be, and the higher the confidence that you can get to what you need to.
100% agree. Obviously, the flip side of that is if you raise too little and you can't get to your next milestone, then that's an issue. But assuming that $1 million is enough, which in today's world with AI tools and with hopefully the founders are at least one of the founders or more ideally is technical, that you can get really far with even $1 million bucks. Totally.
Yeah, and like sometimes the round is 2 million, but like in the kind of 1 to 2 million range, that can get you very far.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Or to a couple just quick closing questions. What's a popular advice that is often given to startup founders that you actually disagree with, and why?
Yeah, one popular advice is you hear this advice to keep the number of people on your cap table low. Like you'll hear, don't bring on too many angels. And the reason I usually hear for why people say that is because they're worried about needing signatures. Like if you're trying to close a deal later on and you have a Series A on the table and you need to go get signatures now from all these, you might have 30, 40, 50, people you need to get signatures from. It can, in theory, delay, the deal closing or cause issues. So that's the reason I've heard. But, I've found that the upside of having a ton of angels on your team is just so valuable. Like like there was one angel I turned away early on because he only wanted to invest, I think it was like 10K, and everyone else I had was investing 25K or up. And I was like, that doesn't seem meaningful enough. And like looking back, like there was no reason for that. Like he would have been a great person to have, on the bench, someone to call, someone to help. And literally the only cost is that signature at the Series A, when you do your first price round. And hopefully you're bringing on board experienced investors that know, they've done this before. This isn't the first, you never want to have someone you're their first investment, because then they might be, you don't know, like they might not even know what they're getting themselves into. They might, like at the Series A say, oh, I want to see the documents and I want to, evaluate them and do a red line or something. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like you put in 10K, just sign this. And like, what do you like? They should blindly sign it. Like you only want people that know that that's what they need to do at the, at the first priced round. And so assuming you're doing that, like, I think there's really no downside. The more people you have, the better. And the check size also doesn't matter in my experience. I mean, you want it to be something that is ideally in their standard range, so they're comfortable. You don't want it to be like their biggest check ever, because then they might be, too precious about it or something like that. And you don't want it to be too small, because then it indicates like, well, why are you generally investing 100K, but then you're doing only 10K for this company? That could be weird. So assuming it's like pretty close to their standard check size and it works with the round that you're putting together, bring them on board. Like, I mean, if they're a great person and you would like to be able to call them when you have questions and you want to have them on your team, then just do it. There's no reason not to. And they will forget the check size too. That's the thing. You'll often hear people say, oh, I need to do a minimum of X, Y, Z. You want to give them enough that they're happy. But if you do have a really oversubscribed round and you have to kind of push people down a little bit, at the end of the day, they will end up forgetting the amount they've invested, and they will just treat you as, oh yeah, you're one of my companies I've invested in. You're one of my portfolio companies, and they will pick up the phone when you call, and that's all you care about. They're not going to, think, oh, you know what, you only let me do 50K and not 200K like I normally do, so I'm only going to help you a fourth as much. Like, that's not how it works. They'll pick up the phone, they'll answer, they'll help, and so the more people you can have there, on your side, the better.
I couldn't agree more with that. Ultimately, the only thing that matters is this a person I want to work with or not? If the answer is yes, then like you can make it work.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
The last question is just, right, you're a first-time founder. For somebody else that is thinking about starting a company or has just started one, if you had to give them just one piece of advice, what would that be?
Well, so I'm actually technically a second-time founder, but the first company was a lot smaller and almost, categorically very different situations. So I think it's fair to not count it. But I will actually mention a lesson I learned from that first company that I think is really important, especially for technical founders. And that is, you need to talk to customers. I know it sounds obvious, but at that time I was a super technical, I just came out of university. I studied computer science. I just wanted to code all day. So when I was faced with the, option of fixing more bugs in the product, building new features, or going out and showing it to people, scheduling calls and meetings and getting, rejection or complex feedback that would change my vision of what I was trying to build. At every juncture, I chose to just code, right? And so at the end of that startup experience, it was only, I think we only did the company for like 8 or 9 months, and then we were acquired. Fortunately, I had a good outcome, but I learned that at the end of that, basically nobody wanted what we had built, right? It was a cool tech project. It was a cool science project. I'm proud of the technology that we built and so the ideas in it, but ultimately nobody wanted to pay for it. And I could have found that out and saved myself 8 months of work if I just like talked to people in the first few weeks and tried to find, so this idea of like selling before you build, it's really off-putting to certain types of technical founders. And I was one of those people. It's like, why wouldn't I just build it and show them? And once they see it, it's going to be so good, and they're going to be like, oh, I need that for sure, But I recommend actually flipping it around and just don't lie about the fact that your product doesn't exist, but sell it before it exists. Say, hey, I'm building this. Let me show you some of my ideas. Let me show you some mock-ups. Show them a bit of a prototype, but it doesn't have to be perfect to get feedback. You should be, and to that point, I would actually recommend this excellent book called The Mom Test, which was really helpful. About the Mom Tests?
Yeah, 100%. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, very helpful, especially to technical founder like myself. And the short version of it is it really just guides you on how to have a conversation with a customer by giving you literally like a script and some types of questions you can ask that will help you to get meaningful feedback from people that are really incentivized to not give you correct feedback. Like when you try to talk to customers, they will try to not hurt your feelings. They will say things like, oh yeah, I would use that. Why don't you come back to me after you built it, and I'll take a look at it. And that doesn't mean anything.
That never works. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to actually ask, will you pay me now? Yeah, if it's that important of a problem, would you pay for it? Like right now, would you sign a contract and then I'll deliver it to you in 3 months? Or you want to ask them, there's you got to read the book to see, but there's ways of phrasing these questions and guiding the conversation that reveal the urgency and pain level of the pain level that they're experiencing, even before you've written a single line of code. And so that was my biggest mistake in the first company, and one that I made sure not to repeat this time around.
I couldn't agree more. This is a fantastic place to end. Thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me, Pascal. I appreciate it.